everyone, and welcome back to my channel True Crime and Trials. Today I will be carrying on with the Groves trial, and it's day 3. There's one witness before we get into the forensic pathologist report, and I will put a warning up for that because it's horrific to listen to and it was really upsetting, so I'll give a warning. If you don't want to listen to it, then just skip that bit. So the first witness of day 3 was Steve Gamble. He's actually an electrician by trade, but is also a volunteer fireman. And on the 12th of June, he got a call to go to the fire department, and he was told there that he had to assist in pumping out a well. He wasn't actually told why, but he'd heard what had been going on and had a rough idea of why he had to do this. He said the well was difficult to get to because of the terrain. It was bumpy, it was muddy, it was raining. There was him, 2 other firemen and the detectives that were there to help with this process. And the well was actually at ground level. And it was surrounded by tall glass, so you could have easily missed it, not seen it, or actually walked into it. So now they show again the pictures of the field where the well was, and he said he was told that the well was roughly 30 foot deep. Now in the opening statements we were actually told 40 foot, so I don't think it matters really how deep it, if it was 30 foot or 40 foot. They actually accessed the well, moved back some of the vegetation, got rid of all that grass that was around there, and then they discussed what they could possibly do to pump out the water. He actually got a heavy duty metal hook to put down the well and started to move it around, and another fireman managed to get hold of a portable pump to try and pump out the water. There's actually a picture of them putting the hose into the well and the hose in the well pumping the water out. He said they removed 12 to 15 feet of water from the well, and then the pump just couldn't remove any more. And it was actually starting to rain hard at this point, so as much as they were trying to remove the water, rainwater was actually going in as well. They tried for a couple of hours to get the water out, but obviously they were unsuccessful. So then they got the heavy duty hooks back out. He put it in to see if he could feel anything in the well, and then he managed, purely by luck he said, to hook on to something, and they all began to help lifting it out. And once it got near the top, they had to try and manoeuvre it to get it out. And obviously when they got it out, they knew what it was. There was a chain with padlocks around the crates, and wire and zip ties and copper wire. And obviously they saw the rocks inside of it. He and the other, once they'd pulled it out, that him and the other fireman had to walk away. They just knew what was inside. And then they got hit with the smell of death. Even he, talking about this, actually started to break down. They show a picture of him pulling the crate out, and the crate, when they'd actually got the crate out, when it was laid on the ground, and he said the crate weighed 60 to 80 pounds. So that was his testimony. They do actually get another fireman up who was there as well, and his testimony was pretty much the same. So now we are on to Dr. Susan Brown. She's the forensic pathologist, so if you don't want to hear this, then skip ahead now. She explains what she does when she receives the body from a scene, and what she has to do to prepare the body for autopsy. Obviously they're showing pictures that she took along the way of this process. We don't actually see them, but you know, all the jury in the court can see all the pictures, and Daniel and Jessica are actually looking down, crying. She describes, once she's opened the crate, she describes an iron type anchor wrapped around his poor little body, and he was wrapped in numerous layers of plastic, and he was also wrapped in 2 blankets. When she weighed him, he weighed 4.5 pounds and was 20.5 inches long. He had a bruise on his leg, he had a laceration on his left upper arm, and there was a fracture on his arm. His left forearm is actually fractured in 2 places, and his left leg is bruised and his shin is fractured. He has bruising on the right side of his chest as well. He also had 2 calluses on his ribs, which signifies old healing. But when she looked at his organs, she didn't actually find any injuries to his organs. She wanted, obviously part of this process is taking blood for toxicology, but due to how long his body had actually been in the well and how long he'd actually been deceased, there was no blood for her to use, so she had to take a portion of his liver to be tested. There's a 2-inch fracture on the top of his head, and there was actually another fracture on his skull which was showing signs of healing, and she actually believes from what she saw that he actually had brain bleeding, or a brain bleed, and she believes the cause of death is homicidal violence because of all the evidence she had and put it all together. Most of the fractures weren't showing signs of healing, and some of them were actually complete fractures. So they were either done just before he died, or after. She said the bruising was due to blunt force trauma, and that when the toxicology report came back, they found amphetamine and methamphetamine in his liver. Now, this poor baby. So, cross-examination from Daniel's attorney. She was trying to totally discredit that, you know, obviously from the coroner's report that he'd obviously been abused, but this attorney was trying to discredit that, and make, you know, say, could it have possibly been an accident? I'm not sure what accident can actually cause complete fractures in a baby's body, because their bones are quite bendy, so it would actually take some force to actually break a baby's bones. She actually got her to say that on the outside, Dylan actually looked like a normal, well-nourished baby. And obviously, that was before she actually found everything else. And the redirect from the prosecution just clarifies that the drugs that were found in his body at the time of autopsy were not from birth. He'd actually recovered from that and obviously got more in his system. Again, Daniel's attorney gets back up, and the coroner does not think, in her opinion, that Dylan drowned. He actually died from homicidal violence. So now we're on to another big testimony, and I'll see how I go with this. I might actually No, I think I might actually get through it all, so bear with me. It might be another long one, but you know, there's a lot to this case, and obviously they're wanting to get this finished by the end of the week, so they're just ploughing on through, and it's a seriously hard one to listen to. So we have Detective Jodie Conkle, and she assisted in the Groves investigation, and she was asked to do the interview with Jessica, and all she knew at this point was that a child was missing. So in the interview, Jessica told her she was living here, there and everywhere, but not in the home, and Jessica denied all drug use. Jodie then interviewed Daniel when he eventually got brought in, and both Jessica and Daniel both told her child services had picked Dylan up. Now, when asked about how Daniel was behaving, she said he was dope sick, which obviously meant he had been using and hadn't had any for a while. And she said at one point Daniel actually laid on the floor and was groaning and passing gas. And then he did actually admit he was dope sick. Daniel told her he eventually, after many different stories and lies, he told her that he found Dylan in his crib dead. He said nobody had touched him or harmed him. And I am trying with all my might to not give my opinion, not to get angry, and just to report what was said. So please forgive me if anybody's expecting me to give my opinion. I don't want to go down that route. I don't want to bash anyone. I just want to give the facts of this case. So, Daniel had said Dylan was absolutely fine prior to his passing. So after Jodie had spoke to Daniel, she went back to Jessica to try and get more info, but Jessica again was closed off and cold and wouldn't answer anything. She tried every interviewing tactic she had learned. She even showed her a picture of Dylan to try and spark anything from her, but she even refused to look at those. But she wasn't crying. So Jodie actually went out to do a search of the Groves property, and she took photos inside. She shows the pictures she took of the pictures of Dylan that they had in the home. Then she goes back to speak to Daniel again, and he finally admits he'd been lying about where Dylan was, but in and amongst this, he was constantly asking how Jodie was, if she was okay. Not Jodie, Jessica. He was worried about her. So then they decide to let Jessica into the interview room with Daniel. And she said, you know, they have a viewing room where they can hear and see everything that's being said. And while they are... so they play the recording of the... Sorry about that. I wasn't going to use this application for recording again, but I did, and it froze again. So I really do apologise. So, like I was saying, they were playing the recording of the interview in the interview room while Jessica was in there with Daniel, and it's absolutely mind-blowing. And when Jessica walks into the interview room, you know, they sit down, they're constantly talking about how worried they are about the dogs, and then they start whispering and saying things, which I'll come to in a bit. Then Jodie walks back into the interview room and asks if Daniel's feeling better. He'd actually been given medication to help with the dope sickness. He'd been given anti-sickness tablets and some Imodium. I mean, he looks an absolute disgrace, as you can see in my thumbnail picture, and in the courtroom he's actually tidied himself up, but he looks an absolute disgrace. And he said that the story about child services taking Dylan was something that he and Jessica had come up together. So now back to the recording. As I said, they're both more worried about how the dogs are at the home. And when they start whispering, Jodie says to Daniel, they told me you said he was dead. And Daniel says, they told me you knew he was dead. Then Jessica says, they told me you told them everything. Then they talk about what cells they're in, what it's like, and Jessica says they told her she was going to be the most hated woman in the jail, so they put her in a cell by herself to keep her safe, and their faces would be all over the news. They keep whispering, and then they'd start talking normally. I mean, these two... They're talking about how bad jail is. No mention of poor Dylan or Daniel Jr. at this point. So then Jessica's taken back out. Jodie goes back in and tells Daniel that he lied about where Dylan's body was. He denies he's lying, and she says she heard everything that him and Jessica were talking about. He keeps denying it, even though she's heard him say that he'd led them on a wild goose chase. Keeps denying it. Then he says he keeps telling her he's telling her the truth. He keeps asking about the dogs. She reassures them they're being taken care of. But you can see Jodie is working so hard to get Daniel to admit the truth about where Dylan is, so they can get him out and get him laid to rest. Then he agrees to take them to the right spot this time. So then her and Daniel and other detectives go out to get Dylan's body. Jodie did actually have a chance to speak to Daniel Jr. She can't actually say what he said, but she believes he had nothing to do with Dylan's injuries. Then they say that Jessica had a visit from someone called Stacey Hall, which is Jessica's sister. And on every visit and every phone call, it's all recorded so they can hear everything. So they play that recording. And Jessica tells her that she would never hurt her children, and Stacey says, I know you wouldn't. And then Stacey asks if it was the drugs, and Jessica says, no, definitely not. So, I mean, she even lied to her. She talks about how Daniel Jr. probably won't want to talk to her again, and he's such a good boy, and she misses him. She says accidents happen and mistakes are made. Jessica says she's getting death threats, and in parts of this recording it's hard to understand what's actually being said, but you could actually go and watch it for yourself if you want to hear it. Jessica is telling Stacey nothing happened and mistakes happen. She just keeps saying that. So when that's finished, we find out that Jodie searched the Groves residence and she found a calendar, and there's something marked on the calendar about the worst day ever, which is when Daniel Jr. was removed from the home. Daniel told her that Dylan died between the 28th and 38th of March. And again, confirming that there were no phone calls to 911 about Dylan. So obviously when Daniel found Dylan dead in his crib, he didn't phone any emergency services to help. So the cross-examination is Daniel's attorney, and she tries to point out all the bits in the interview of how caring Daniel was, that he was worried about his wife and all that, whatever. So the next witness is Daniel Groves Jr. Obviously, he's not on camera, and now he's 15, and he's still with his aunt and uncle who Child Services placed him with. He says he saw some bruising on Dylan's head all the way around his head. He was actually pointing out where it was, but obviously we couldn't see it. He was actually given an explanation for his injuries, and he was told that a small dream catcher had fallen on Dylan. And something about he'd managed to swing a tiny stone up to his head. He was asked if he hurt Dylan. No, obviously he didn't. And then we found out that Daniel Jr. was actually being asked by his father to give him his urine. And Daniel's attorney gets up for a cross-examination, and Daniel Jr. says he never saw his father injure baby Dylan. So that's the end of day 3. It was a very hard day. I found the forensic pathologist's testimony very, very hard to listen to. So I will be back with another video for day 4. Okay, bye for now.